everyone for our first lecture in our conference. Oh no, that's okay. Um, so I will be talking to you about John Wesley's thought on money and ministry. This will become our financial guide, financial ministry guide for the Northern Philippine Conference. So it's very important that we talk about finance because we are a religious group. So we exist for God's purposes. And so we will be talking about God's ministry and God's resources. So there is a difference between a religious group and the government. Our sole purpose is for ministry, where God has called us. So that's why we have a different way of doing ministry and doing our finance. So also, we will be talking about the good stewardship of resources that God has given us. So that's why we will be talking about John Wesley's thought on money and ministry. So in this lecture, I'm going to share to you about this story that caught my attention by the International Church at Mount Caira. One of their members really have caught my attention. And then the second thing that we will be talking here is why we will focus on Wesley, where there are so many people that we can use and become a model in regards to finance. But we will choose Wesley in this setting. And then after choosing Wesley, we are going to explore his theological principles regarding the acquisitions and the spending of resources, especially here about money. And then later on, we are going to get some lessons or implications towards how we will do good stewardship when it comes to finance here in NPC. So let me share to you the story of one of the member in International Church of Mount Caira. So one time, last December, we have one pastor who was admitted in the hospital. And so our health insurance only covers 100,000, but the medical expenses goes beyond 100,000. It's almost 200,000. So we are trying to raise funds now to meet the needs of one of our pastors. So out of the blue, one member in this International Church of Mount Caira donated 21,329 to be exact. No, it means to say 2,000 ringgit, Malaysian ringgit. So it was donated for our minister here in the Northern Luzon. So first of all, I want to let you know that this member in Mount Caira is not a Filipino. So he is not a Filipino, and their family is not Filipino. The second thing is they are not Free Methodist Church members. So they are not really Wesleyan in their theological principles. And so not only that they are members, they do not live in the Philippines. So they live in Malaysia. So that caught my attention. But the thing that really brought highlight, aside from those facts, is that this family told one of our member, he said that I have saved from our expenses 2,000 ringgit. And so I will be giving you this 2,000 ringgit and use it for that pastor. And so that's why we receive 21,321 when it is converted in the Philippine money. So that family caught my attention because that kindness, that act of kindness and compassion reminds me of the Wesleyan practice or the principle on money and ministry. So first of all, if you can see the act that he said, I have saved money from our monthly expenses and I have extra 2,000 ringgit that I'm going to share for charity. And so one of the things that caught my attention there is discipline. So here is a family who have made a budget for their monthly expenses, but they also discipline their expenses. And the more they discipline, they were able to meet their family and save also extra for charity. They have already extra money for charity, but the discipline that they did in their monthly expenses augment their capacity to help others. And so that is a very thing that really caught my attention, that kind of discipline that he is doing when it comes to his resources. So Wesley said, actually, the word charity comes from the original word for that used in the Bible is love. According to Wesley, as Paul used it, it is really love. But along the way, the Latin interpreters use the word charity. And so it changed from love into the word charity. But for Wesley, he said that the original word for that is really love. And that love that he was talking is about loving our neighbors. So this idea of charity for Wesley is really about loving our neighbors, meaning to say it is an expression of God's love. So this is now a love that we have for God that flows to the neighbors. And so for Wesley, this is how he see it. Now in Mark chapter 12, 30 to 31, it says that we have to love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our soul, with our mind, with all our strength. And that is piety. That is our worship to God. That is how we express our exaltation to God. But it did not stop there. It says, and love your neighbor. So in Wesley's practice, he has this combination of worship and also charity. This religious practice, piety, spirituality, and doing the action, the charity part. And so this is what this member from Mount Caira has opened my mind in the way they practice their resources regards to money. So in Wesley's sermon on the use of money, he said, having gained all you can, and secondly, save all you can, then give all you can. That is what Wesley said when it comes to the usage of money. And so you can see now the comparison between this member from Mount Caira. Now, they have gained all they can. They have also saved all they can. So part of the saving that they have is the discipline with their expenses. So the more they discipline with their expenses, they have provided for the family, and also they have provided resources for those who are in need. That's why they were able to give all you can. And so after meeting all their needs, now it is time to give everything to others also. And so that's what I see in relationship to that practice in Mount Caira International Church. So why I am sharing to you this idea about resources? Because look at what happened. In time of pandemic, in time of crisis, for one of our pastors, here comes this one person out of the blue who is not a member, who is not a Wesleyan in their religion, but he became a blessing for us, pastor, for the Northern Philippines, the beneficiary of this love for neighbors, this charity. That is being practiced by this. In time of crisis and pandemic, there are so many people outside who are in need. But we need to multiply this kind of people. These Wesleyan principles, the more we multiply this kind of people, the more we will be able to help others. or express our love to God by loving our neighbors through this charity. So I think in this time of crisis, the more we need Wesleyan people. In time of crisis, we need to develop a more Wesleyan principle regarding our resources, because this is one key in order to help others who are greatly affected with the pandemic. And so that's why for us today, when it comes to resources, it's time to become Wesleyan. That is one of the challenges that I have today. So, why are we talking about John Wesley? First of all, for those who have not known John Wesley is the founder of Methodism. So he is our great-great-father of our Methodism. So you can see that Methodism is part of our Free Methodist Church. Now, if we are going to trace, like a family tree, trace the roots, it will end up with John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, which started in Oxford by a small group of people who practice discipline. No, they are methodological in practice because they want to discipline themselves, contrary to the practice of others. And so they have gained influence. They attract followers, and it grow and grow and grow. And there were more people who are like John Wesley. And that's why it started from England to America and also to the Philippines. So he is our founder. Although the Free Methodist founder is Benjamin Titus Roberts, our great root comes to Wesley. So we have denominations like the Nazarene Church. They also trace their roots to John Wesley. We have the Salvation Army. They also trace their roots to John Wesley. Then we have also the United Methodist and the Methodist group and the Wesleyan Church. They also have their roots towards John Wesley. Same with Free Methodist Church. So one of the things why it is very important, because this is an authoritative person for us, because we subscribe to his theological beliefs and principles. So that's why we are called Wesleyan tradition. We are from Wesleyan tradition because we embrace the theological teachings of John Wesley when it comes to salvation. That it is not only for the few, but for everyone. It is open for everyone. No, grace is for everyone, all and for all, in all and for all. So when it comes to sin, when it comes to understanding of man, when it comes to church, now we embrace the teachings of John Wesley. That's why it's very important for all of us to know why we choose Wesley as our model, because he is a best ministry practice model. He did not only speak or thought about this idea, but he lived this idea. He practiced his principles when it comes to resources. So, according to Telford, who made a biography of John Wesley, he said that by limiting his expenses to the same sum, he was able to give 62 pounds the third year and 92 in charity. So that's what Telford said. Meaning to say, what Telford was saying, that in the first year of Wesley, he was only earning like 30 pounds. And so he set a budget for that for himself, and the others will be for charity. But the unique thing about Wesley is that as he grew in income, like 30 to 60 to 90, the expenses of Wesley remains the same, but his capacity to help others grow bigger and bigger and bigger the more that his income grow. So that is Wesley. So at the end of his life, he does not have many properties, resources, because he has been busy feeding the hungry, giving clothes to the poor, giving education to the churches and the children who are less privileged. He was busy building orphanages for those who do not have homes, those who have now neglected. That is John Wesley. That's why Methodism before grew in numbers, because they have been influencing people. They were, gaining attraction of people because of this man. And so he's a great ministry model for all of us. So let me share to you what are the principles he hold, why he behaved this way. Now, Wesley did not just think out of the law, okay, I will just do this, maintain these expenses you have monthly, even I grow in numbers. No, just do this one. No, he based that on his theological understanding about God. And so today, I'm going to share to you some of the theological principles that underlies behind such practice and actions by John Wesley. So the first theological principle has to do with the creator and created being, the God-human relationship. Wesley understood that God is the creator, meaning to say the owner of everything we have here on earth, even ourselves. He has that foundation in us that there is the great creator and we are just created being. So in other words, he believes that we are stewards of resources, not owners of the resources that we have. So I want to make it clear. Wesley understood that the money that you have, the money that you have in the bank, and the money that you have in your pockets, the money in your hands are not really yours. The owner of that is God, and you are just steward of that resources. And so Wesley said, human beings were not at liberty to use it as they pleases, but as their master pleases. They have no right to dispose of anything which is in their hands, but according to the will of their Lord. For they are not proprietor of any of these things, but barely entrusted with them by another, and entrusted on this express condition that they shall dispose all of their master's orders. So later on, he said also, use them as your master's goods. Or use them only as our master's goods and according to their particular direction, which he has given us in his word. So in short, this understanding of God as my creator, and I am a created being, this understanding that the things that I have, even my body, and the resources that I have, the house, the money that I have, the cars, are not really mine, but of God. So now, by that principle, he guides his actions. He guides how he uses resources. No, according not to his plan, but according to the plan of God, according to the purposes of God. That is why one reason Wesley was saving all he can and giving all he can, because this is God's resources, and it is God's God entrusted these resources for his purposes. And so now for Wesley, after providing for his own and his family, now he has to provide where God wants to use this resource that he has on his hands. That's the idea. In feeding the poor, because that's what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches about giving clothes to those who does not have clothes. So that's why Wesley involved in those things. That's his idea, because God has this resource in order to give to others who are in need. He channeled it to you so that you can be a channel of blessing to those who are in your reach. So let me clear this up. The first point is we are only stewards. We are just given temporary access of the resources, but the resources that you have access to should be used according to the owner himself. So if God says, give this to this poor, give this to those who are hungry, to those thirsty, to those who are in need of medical expenses, that's the idea of the resources you have, because you are not the owner of the resources. God is the owner of that resources, and he wants to use that for his purposes. That's why this idea captured my mind in Malachi 3:10. We have been using this one. No, how do we rob God? And this is what I saw. When God has intentionally put these resources for you in order to be used this for others who are in need, if we do not channel that resources to those who are in need, which God intentionally give us for them to use, then we have robbed God his resources, which was supposed to be for those who are in need. And so that's how I understand Wesley in his actions regarding to the acquisition and the spending of the resources, because he saw himself as a steward. So the second thing that I realized with John Wesley when he talks about stewardship, it is very holistic. So everything is interconnected. No, it's not a separate thing that you discuss about resources, and it's not separate with your spirituality, with your body, with your mind, with your feelings, with your affections, with your liberty. It's not. It is connected. That's why Wesley, you are not at liberty to use that money, no, because for Wesley, it is God who is the sole owner of that. And so there will that is supposed to be, masunod natin, because that is that is God's money. So one of the things that comes from this idea of holistic view of stewardship comes from this idea of created in the image of God. So when we are created in the image of God, God has given us understanding, part of the image, the natural image, this understanding, ability to think, to perceive, to imagine, to have this memory. These are all gifts from God. And part of that image also is also our will to do things. To command, the will to command our body organs, to raise our hands, to move, to walk, to run, to command these organs. These are all part of the image of God. So that's why our affections for Wesley, it's not only the money that you have to be a good steward of, you have to be a good steward even in your understanding how you use our knowledge. We have to be a good steward on how we use our imagination, how we use our will, how we use our affections. No, that's why affection should not be going to money, but affection should be given to God. And that is part of stewardship, because God has given us these affections that we have for God's purposes. So you can see that we are created for God's purpose. So that's why all of it should be given also for God's purposes. The organs, are part. The eye should be used for God's glory. The hearing should be used for God's glory. So that's the idea. So part of that is the worldly good. So you can see now how he viewed this stewardship. Stewardship covers all of us. Our body, our mind, our ability, our freedom, our affections is part of that in relationship to money. So Wesley said, do you not know that God entrusted you with that money? Above all above what buys necessities for your families, to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, to help the stranger, the widow, the fatherless, and indeed, as far as it will go, to relieve the wants of all mankind. That's how Wesley viewed. in relationship to money. We are stewards. Everything we have comes from God. And so everything that we have, the resources that we have, either it's physical resource, whether it is the knowledge, the memory, the affections that we have, the organs that we have, it should all be given for God's purposes. That's what Wesley is talking about. That's why his idea of money is not only for him, but for God's ministry also. So the third foundations of Wesley's action regarding how he uses and spends his money has to do with his understanding of human depravity or sin. For Wesley, he knows that there is a problem within us. He knows that there is a problem to everyone who is born out of a woman. So you can see in Wesley's sermon on the education of children, he said, what are these diseases of his nature? What those spiritual diseases which everyone that is born of a woman brings with him into the world? No, he understands there is a problem. And even the Bible speaks of that problem. In Genesis 6, chapter 5, it says that the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil. And look at that one, continually. So there is that idea, was only evil continually. So there is a problem that God sees within us the moment we fall into sin. The moment our parents use their freedom to disobey God. Now, those who are born of a man, the lineage of Adam and Eve, carries the defects with our spiritual body. That's why for Wesley, here comes the idea of saving. The idea of saving, because he knows there is a disease, and this disease needs to be cured. So that's the idea of Wesley when it comes to expenditure of money. So what are these diseases? Actually, there are so many diseases that Wesley understood. But when it comes to money, he focused it on the spiritual disease, which is the love of the world. So naturally, we are inclined to really love the world. Love the creation than the creator. We are naturally inclined in evil to love the world. So when he tried to analyze this idea of love of the world, he divided it into three. There is what he calls the pride of life. This idea of pride of life has to do with about honor, being seen as good to people, highly and exalted one. We want the praises of men for us. Sometimes that becomes our motivation for buying, branded shirts, shorts, having iPhones, because we want to gain the praises of men. That's the idea of Wesley. The other idea of Wesley when it comes to love of the world is that his idea of the desires of the flesh. So Wesley said, do not waste any part of so precious a talent merely in gratifying the flesh, desires of the flesh, in procuring the pleasures of sense, of whatever kind, particularly in enlarging the pleasure of tasting. Despise delicacy and variety, and be content with what plain nature requires. This is how idea of Wesley about saving. He does not want to spend his money, all his money for those desires of the flesh. No, we want to have that expensive food. We want to have that expensive drinks that we have. Buy all those to satisfy our flesh. To achieve satisfaction with our desires for satisfaction of the flesh. So Wesley controlled himself. He just buy plain, enough for him, plain, so that the more he can save, the more he can feed those who are hungry. No, it's not the other way around where we expend all our money towards this food. That's why we don't have any more resources to give to others, because not that we don't have resources, but we use our resources for these satisfactions of the flesh. But for Wesley, his principle is this is a problem, this is an evil problem that he has, and so he has to control it, discipline it, and instead of wasting this money, he will save this money in order to help those who do not have food to eat. And so the other idea of love for the world for Wesley is the desire for the eyes. No? Do not waste any part of so precious a talent, merely gratifying the eyes, or by superfluous or expensive apparel, or by needless ornaments. Waste no part of it in curiously adorning your houses, in superfluous or expensive furniture, in costly paintings, pictures, paintings, gilding, books, in elegant rather than useful gardens. So that is what Wesley is really trying to discipline. So the moment he knows that there is a problem with our physical body naturally apart from the grace of God, without the grace of God, our body, our physical body would always be tended to those desires of the flesh, pride of life, no? Desires of the eyes. That is always our natural inclination apart from the grace of God. That's why Wesley's principle is to know your disease so that you will know your cure. Know your disease so that you will know your cure. And one of the things that he knows is that we have this problem of this love of the world, pride of life, desires of the flesh, desires of the eyes. One of the things that Wesley is doing is disciplining it. Discipline is one of Wesley's practice. So Wesley said, there is one preventative of it, which is also a remedy for it. After you have gained all you can and saved all you can, wanting for nothing, spend not 1 pound, 1 shilling, or 1 penny to gratify either the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, or the pride of life, or indeed for any other end than to please God. Wesley said, hoard nothing, lay up no treasure on earth, but give all you can. That's where Wesley's on his expenditure of money. Discipline. This is why Wesley also practiced this. That's why I will share it to you later, the other part of it. And so the next principle that is attached to it, it's like a coin. No, not only that knowing your disease, but knowing also the grace of God. No, that is at work in our lives today. So for him, it has to do with holiness. No, holiness. That is one of the key theological belief and principle of Wesley, that we should love the Lord our God with all our hearts, with our soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbors. And so for Wesley, because you are steward, and this is all God's resources, at the same time you are created for God and for God alone, then for him we should use all these resources, our mind, our body, and our will, our freedom, our affections, our worldly goods, use it for God's purposes. So this is the idea. It comes from his understanding of holiness. And one of the things that I want to let you know is that this understanding of holiness did not start when we sin. But his understanding of holiness comes from the original creation before sin. Now that we are created in the image of God for God. And so what Wesley is trying to do this is to recover that original purpose and intention of the creation of man and the creation of the world. And that is for God's purposes. So that's why he is very cautious on setting our hearts on riches than God. Because for him, we should focus everything for God and for God alone, even the resources that we have. So he said, do not make them thy end, thy chief delight, thy happiness, thy God. So we should not make the riches, the money that we have, the cars that we have, the houses that we have, as God for ourselves. See that thou expect not happiness in money, nor anything that is purchasable thereby, in gratifying either the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, or the pride of life. So this is why Wesley was disciplining himself. Because not only that he want to discipline, because there is a problem, but he also nurture the grace of God, because he knows that we are originally created to worship the Lord. So that's why for Wesley, when he used the sermon on the use of money, he was really very cautious on how you acquire it, how you gain money. Because for Wesley, it has to do with holiness. Because it's not only about money, because I told you before, everything is interconnected. Your body is even a resource of God. Your mind is a resource of God that has been given to you. Your hands, your eyes, your ears, our tongue, our liberty, our freedom is also a resource that God has given us for God's purposes. That's why for him, gaining money should not compromise or harm our body. So Wesley was cautious. No, we should not die, working 24 hours just to earn money, because the resource is not only about money but your body. So we should also be good stewards of our body. So that's why gain all you can, but not at the expense of your health, not at the expense of others. No, that you destroy those created in the image of God, that you harm others' feelings also. So that's why for Wesley, we acquire money, but not in a sense that we break the will of God. Not to the sense that we compromise our salvation, our soul, our peace, the peace that we have, that will be compromised because of those illegal acts of acquiring money. So that is part of his idea of holiness. No, your body is not yours, it is God's. So we should be a good stewards also of that. That's why for him, when you acquire money, it should not be contrary to the word of God, but not only how you acquire, but how you spend your money should not run contrary to the will of the masters or contrary to God's word. And so here is also this idea of Wesley. This idea of the means of grace. One of the things that I see why Wesley practiced charity, because this is his way also not only of giving himself to God, but I told you there is a problem with us, but there is also a solution, and that is through the grace of God. So what Wesley is doing when he practiced all of this is he practiced to nurture his spiritual health, maintain his spiritual health by involving himself in charity. So that is a means of grace to nurture one's spiritual life by involving in charity works. So that is Wesley. So he said, I did for what I saved from my own, because people are questioning him, why are you doing that one? So I did for what I saved from my own meat, will feed another that else would have none. So Wesley was thinking there are people who are in need of food in 18th century England because of poverty. And God wants to feed those people, children who have no food. And so for Wesley, he responds to God's call, to God's heart in feeding the poor, in feeding the hungry, and clothing those who are naked by saving, by disciplining. So that the more he saved, the more he can give to those who are in need. That is the principle of Wesley. It's not only the discipline, but there's also the nurture part. And lastly, I want to let you also see that one of the principles why Wesley is acting this way, why does he involve in charity? Why does he to do discipline with his self? Why do he have to be cautious and become good stewards of the resource of God? Because he believes we will be held accountable in the judgment day. So meaning, when we face the Lord will ask us accountability. So Wesley said, stewardship stops the moment we die. Stewardship stops the moment we die. So he said, when the body returns to the dust as it was, the time of stewardship is at end. So he further said that being no longer stewards, we give an account of our stewardship. So the moment we die and we face God, God will ask us, how did you use your body? No? Wesley have example of reflective questions. For example, were thy affections placed and regulated in such a manner as I appointed in my word? Didst thou give me thy heart? Didst thou not love the world, neither the things of the world? So he will not give accountability on how you use your affection. So in the time of judgment, he will ask you, how did you use my affection? How did you use my freedom? How did you use my body? Is it used for the glory of God or for the glory of the evil one? So he will not only ask you, how did you use my money? No, he will ask you, as I told you, stewardship is holistic. We will be held accountable for everything that we have, including our knowledge, our freedom, our affection, our mind, our eyes, our ears. God will hold us accountable. That's why for Wesley, he makes sure that he will be accountable to the resources of God. That's why he wants to become a good steward. So when it comes to money, here is also his reflective question. In what manner didst thou employ the comprehensive talent or money? Not in gratifying the desire of the flesh, the desire of the eye, or the pride of life. Not squandering it away in vain expenses, the same as throwing out into the sea. Not hoarding it up to leave behind thee, the same as burning it in the earth. But first, supplying thy own reasonable wants, together with those of thy family, then restoring the remainder to me, through the poor, whom I had appointed to receive it, whose wants were to be supplied first, and the blessedness of giving rather than receiving. Was thou accordingly a general benefactor to mankind, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, comforting the sick, assisting the stranger, relieving the afflicted, according to their various necessities. So Wesley understood that when life ends, accountability follows. No, judgment follows. So Wesley was not only thinking of his present life, he was also thinking about his life after death. Will I be found faithful and good steward with God's resources? So that shaped Wesley's way of acquiring and using money as God's resource. So, what will be the implication for us here in NPC? So, one of the things that I want to let you know is our success story, our good financial stewardship story. So, as you know, when we started NPC, we have been challenged with finance. We have so many things but we have small resources. So that's why our expenses natin noon was almost 90, but our income is only 40. That's why we are acquiring debts because we cannot sustain by not diverting funds to support the budget that we have. But when we started to really become a good steward, when we try to really, gain all we can and then save all we can, we were able to give also all we can to other people. And in that way, God has blessed us. So when He blessed NPC, NPC became also a blessing to others. That's why we started now to have damayan. We started now to have crisis, disaster response. We are now involved in social ministry and charity works. We have now hand for pastors. One of the things that I want to let you know, it's the same people 2 years ago and today. The difference is we are now channeling our resources back to God. We are now using our resources to God. So you can see we have potential. We have resources. It's not a matter that we don't have resources. Where are we using our resources? Are we using it for the glory of God? So the start when we start focusing our resources to God, you can see God has been meeting our needs. We are now able to buy church lot in General Trias. We're now able to raise the salaries of pastors. We are now able to extend charities to other people because now the resources of God are being redirected again to Him, not to the pleasures of the world. But I want to let you know, if we start to become Wesleyan, the more we gain, the more we save, the more we can follow God's will for our lives. The more we can reach out those whom God appointed to be fed. The more we can reach out, multiply our ability to help to those people whom God appointed to be clothed, to have a house, to have an education. We can do that if we now remind ourselves that the resources that we have in our pockets and in our banks are not ours, but God's resources. So, what I'm telling is that we can still grow more. We can still be able to help more people, feed more people, clothe more people, send people to education, or children to education. We can still do more if we start now the principle of Wesley when it comes to the acquisition and expenditure of our money. So if we practice these principles, it will become a tool in achieving our vision and mission. The more we multiply this Wesleyan principle, the more we grow in numbers, the more capacity of us to grow. Now, if we have grown our resources, the more we can plant churches, the more we can acquire lots, the more we can send workers, missionaries to places who do not have NPC, the more we can do that because now God's resources are being channeled for His purposes and for His glory. This theological principle of Wesley is very important for all of us because it reminds us, it corrects us in how we use and spend our money. This is a very important tool. And lastly, I want to tell you, now if we don't have discipleship materials, now we have a discipleship materials when it comes to money, when it comes to stewardship. The framework of Wesley, knowing that we are created being, that we have a God who is a creator and the owner of everything, we can use that God-human relationship to disciple people. Remind them, no, you are not proprietor, but you are mere stewards of the resources of God. Now we can use as a framework for our discipleship this idea of stewardship as a holistic view when we are created in the image of God. We cannot let people, inform people, and nurture people that we should not only think of money as stewardship or properties, those are only part, the worldly goods. But we also have the other resources that God has given us, that we should be good stewards. The image of God, the understanding that God has given us, the liberty that God has given us, the affection that God has given us, the freedom, the imagination, no? The sense of taste, sight, hearing, no, touch, everything should be also taken into consideration. Now, you can disciple your people. Disciple yourself. Now, we have a discipleship framework when it comes to resources. Now, with the Wesleyan framework, we can use his understanding of sin, on how we should be aware. One of the things that I like Wesley is that he was aware there was a problem, but not only that he was aware, he recognized that this is really a problem. And not only that he recognized, he was convicted that he falls short of this. That's why he disciplined himself. And so this idea now, we can now teach, nurture, disciple our people regarding discipleship when it comes to money by talking about the spiritual diseases that we have. Now, by using his understanding of holiness, that we are created for God's glory and for God alone, now we can use that as a model, as a framework in discipleship, in talking about resources, money. That even how we spend money should also be for God's glory. How we use our money should also be used for God's glory. Now we can use that as a discipleship material to people. And lastly, we have also this idea of salvation. That for Wesley, there will be judgment time. There will be accountability that will come after we die. So that's why Wesley was not only thinking of what life is now, but what life after you die. Where will you spend your life? So that's why for Wesley, it's very important that we understand that at the end of our life here on earth, judgment follows. And part of that judgment is giving accountability to the resources that God has given us. It has become a framework for all of us. So my prayer for all of us today, that I think the challenge of Makina, when he's saying it's time to be Wesleyan, I think holds true today. Because Wesleyan, meaning to say, for Wesley in this time, when there was crisis, when there was poverty, when there was so many brokenness before, Wesley became a Wesleyan. No, he was a not he became a Wesleyan. He practiced this principle that by doing this, he was able to help other people fulfill God's purposes in his life. That's why Methodism before grew in numbers because of John Wesley. So today, it's time for us to be Wesleyan. It's time for us not just to know that there is this member in International Church of Mount Caira. We have to remind ourselves that this kind of member, this kind of character, this kind of practices needs to be multiplied in order for its ability and capacity to multiply also in helping those other people. So today, let us challenge ourselves that this is now a new direction of NPC. It's now, we now have to not focus internally, but we have now to start focusing externally, involving in real mission, where we now involve ourselves in winning souls. When we start now to multiply and become a light post in places where there is no light, when there is still darkness. It's time for us to use resources for God's glory. It's time now for us, Wesleyan, especially in this time of pandemic. We need the kind of International Church of Caira member. We need the kind of Wesleyan people and even the Northern Philippines. We need to multiply, so that God's ability to help other people through the resources that he has given and entrusted to these people in the Northern Philippines will be used according to his purposes. So God bless us all. Thank you all for listening this time. in the afternoon after a whole day of work. And I'm very happy that you are here to us today. So that is my lesson and lecture about John Wesley's thought on money and ministry. May it become a blessing to us and become our tool in order for us to use our resources and channel resources for God's glory and glory alone. Amen.